Perfect. So, Jordan, I'll go ahead and let you take the floor, and I'll go
Thank
ahead and mute everyone. If you guys have questions, please put them on the chat or raise your hands, and we'll be actually watching that, and then we can answer as we go,
Yeah.
or we can answer once we're done.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Maggie. Thanks to Janet for having me back. I'm sharing my screen, hopefully, so that we don't have to all look at my face. That's better for everyone, I promise. Yeah, we do have some good news today. I don't know. You guys have a great association staff. You're very lucky because you guys always manage to be the ones to get me right when the information's like hot off the press. I usually come out right after our forecast gets released, like within a week. I think I'm usually there in Visalia. And today we just actually put out our monthly press release as well. So this is literally as hot off the presses as we can get. There is good news, but there's also bad news. And so I don't want to sugarcoat that for you. I want you to have a realistic picture of what to expect for the next, 12 months, although probably forecasts are have a shelf life of about 1 to 2 weeks, I think, at this point, unfortunately. But when you think about the good news, there's all kinds of signs that the economy is starting to heal. We see it across a variety of indicators, unemployment, consumer spending. I think we just see it when you're, out and about, that people are out and buying stuff again, and folks have started to get back to work. You throw on top of that the fact that, and again, this is hot off the press as well as of today, rates are at all-time low levels, right? And I think I always joke with you guys about my dad's mortgage rate back in the day and things. I think I even said I would come back this year and like eat my hat if we had, below 3.5% mortgage interest rates. I don't feel too guilty. I'm going to have to go grab my hat and eat it though, because with the pandemic and the Fed taking unprecedented action with all these emergency rate cuts, and also just panic in the rest of the world, the U.S. government bond has become very attractive, and as a result, it means we're really enjoying historically all-time low interest rates, and thus it's not surprising really that we see the buyer demand starting to come back, right? And there too, we also see it across a number of indicators. I mean, we see it just in our own business, right? We're hearing anecdotally from realtors all across the state that there's lots of demand and buyers want homes, and competitive market for the homes that are out there. And it's not surprising when you put it in the context of these kind of 2.9% mortgage rates that we're seeing today, and actually even before rates dropped below 3%, we had already seen the market start to come back. In fact, when you look at the actual pending data, the worst of the crisis was in March and April, right? We saw precipitous declines in March and April as people pulled back. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know, how deep the thing could go or how deep the recession was going to be, and people really did press pause in a significant way. But what we saw was that from about mid-April onward, we started to get a better sense, more clarity about just what this thing actually looked like. And in fact, we started to see the pending sales come back pretty consistently from about the 17th or 18th of April right on through the end of June. And so it's no surprise, therefore, that also we've seen closed sales start to turn back around, right? Because the demand is there. They started going out and looking at homes, applying for mortgages, going pending, and indeed those homes are now starting to close. And we see that in the realtors business itself. We've been doing a weekly survey of members, and realtors are reporting feeling more optimistic in general over the course of the last 2 months. And we see it in the consumers too. And that's ultimately what really matters. We're still an economy that's basically 70% consumer driven, right? If you look at GDP, which is just the measure of the size of the US economy, 70% of that is still consumer driven. And so as go consumers, really so goes the economy. It takes a lot of business investment or international trade to cancel out pullbacks in consumer spending. And so that's the good news, right? Really broad-based improvement. I could point to all kinds of indicators all throughout the gamut of that, those various areas where things are getting better. The bad news is that there's still a lot of healing left to do, right? There's been tremendous damage in April and May, and even as things start to move in the right direction, we've got a big hole to climb out of, right? That's not to diminish the progress we've made, but it is, you know, just to keep things in perspective, that it's full recovery is still a long way out. And I think that, you know, even with the unprecedented damage, had it been less, the other part of this that compounds the issue is that, you know, there's still a big learning curve, and we're still figuring out how to operate in a kind of post-COVID world, right? And the rules of the road are changing, and that takes time to figure out. I think that the policymakers are going to be changing the rules on us, and we're going to constantly be having to adapt and learn and adjust our sails, and that's going to preclude a more rapid rebound as well, right? The other thing I'll say, and this isn't new or unique to COVID, but what we've seen is that as buyer demand has started to come back and the market has started to improve again, all of our old problems are starting to rear their ugly head again, right? Supply is a humongous problem. I was here complaining about supply for the last couple of years in a row, and unfortunately, I'm here today to report that the supply situation is even worse, and that doesn't show the same signs of rebounding in the way that the buyer demand was, right? You have buyers out there who, if you're still employed, you're looking at these 2.9% interest rates and the fact that you've been cooped up in your house for the last 4 months, and you're saying it's time to buy, right? But unfortunately, sellers haven't responded in the same way. Sellers they don't have a gun to their head in terms of needing to get out of that home. The conventional wisdom is that it's not smart to sell a home in a recession, right? They're not thinking through it much further than the fact that we're in a recession. They don't dig into this MLS data and find out that prices really aren't falling, right? And that homes are still selling quickly, and that the people who are selling homes aren't really having to discount those properties. All of the stuff that they might be worried about isn't really there in the data, but it's part of that kind of public consciousness. And I think that's where, you know, we've got to be really on the ball as realtors to get out there with the data and say, no, in fact, homes are selling faster than ever. There's minimal discounting. You know, look at how quick things are selling. Look at the prices are up whatever percent, right? And really stick that stuff in front of their nose, because the supply stuff is really my biggest concern at this point. The low rates are going to keep buyers wanting to buy. The question is, are there going to be homes to put them in, right? And I think that we're already seeing that in the local MLS, which I'll show you here in a second, in a very real way, right? And so that's already slowing the rebound, the progress that we've enjoyed since about mid-April, where those pendings really have started to come back. And again, that's, I think, going to be the biggest roadblock. It's not figuring out the rules of the road and all that stuff. It's going to be, how do we find enough homes to get all these buyers into who want these, you know, historically low mortgages? And then, of course, COVID remains the big wild card, right? And so whatever happens with that is going to impact our forecast, and that is the part that I'm just not qualified to make a forecast on. I'll show you the actual data that we have up till this point, but in terms of predicting that, you're going to have to talk to somebody a little smarter than me. I'll just be able to tell you what happens to the housing market when one of those scenarios eventually does play out. But let's start with the good news, right? And there's lots of that to go around. People's Exhibit A, I think, there is in the labor markets. I always talk about how the labor market is the single biggest driver of the housing market, right? And we've seen 14 weeks in a row where fewer and fewer folks are losing their jobs, right? We went from a point in late March where almost 7 million people in a single week lost their job and filed for unemployment. You know, and again, that's been declining for the better part of 3 months, pretty consecutively, down to just quote unquote, and I guess I have to leave the air quotes on there for that one, but just down to 1.3 million, which is tremendous improvement and consistent improvement, right? We see that is week after week after week, things have consistently decelerated in terms of those job losses. Unemployment actually came down more than we expected in June. So we don't have the California number yet. I think we'll get that on tomorrow morning. But, you know, we went from basically 15% unemployment nationwide 2 months ago to 11.1% last month. And that's still high, right? You know, 11.1%. We definitely don't want to go fish out the best bottle of champagne and pop the corks yet. But again, we've seen 2 months in a row where the labor markets have healed, and even though California is maintaining a higher level of unemployment, we do expect that when the June number comes out, we will also see a market improvement here in the state as a whole. We lost 20.8 million jobs in April, but we've actually continued to claw some of that back month after month. So through the course of the last 2 months through June, we've added back 7.5 of basically the 20.8 million jobs that we lost in April. So starting to move again in the right direction. And that is critical, right? Because when you're not employed, then you're not shopping for a house, right? You're not making your mortgage payment. You're not looking to trade up on your apartment and make, investors happy and all of that stuff. And the converse is true. When you're getting back to work, when your income starts coming in again, right, then all of those things are wins in the sale of the housing market as we move forward. I mentioned as well that consumers are a hugely critical part of the overall economy, representing basically 7 out of every $10 that we generate as a U.S. economy. And we've seen nice improvements there too. We had the single largest decline in consumer confidence in recorded history back in April, right? And then it plateaued in May, and actually we've seen that it started to go back up in June. Preliminary estimates for July are that consumers were feeling better towards the beginning part of this month as well, and we expect that will continue to improve. Again, the questions about what this looks like are much more clear. The effects, the impacts are far less opaque than they were in late March, early April, when we really just didn't have our arms kind of wrapped around how big the crisis was. As people feel better, we see that, lo and behold, and again, this number is hot off the press as of this morning, that they're actually putting their money where their mouth is, right? They didn't just report more confidence. Retail sales, and especially if you strip out food and auto, which, car sales have not come back all the way yet, those big long-term purchases, but you strip away cars and look at retail minus cars, which is the orange line here, we're back to pre-crisis levels of consumer spending, right? So huge, unprecedented hits. We've never seen declines in consumer spending the way that we saw in March and April, but then we've never seen increases on the back end that we've seen in May and June. And so consumers are moving in the right direction, and that's starting to spill through even to California's housing market, especially on the good time to sell. So this is our housing sentiment index, and I broke it down into the component pieces for you. But if you look on the right-hand side, the percentage of Californians, we talk to over 1,000 Californians every month just to get a sense of how they're feeling about the housing market. That was cut in half, right? We went from basically 62% of people back in February thinking it was a good time to sell a home, down to basically 29% in April. But that has since shown 3 months of consistent improvement. We're not quite back to pre-crisis levels, but we've made huge strides from a point in time where basically only 1 out of 4 people that you talk to, even with today's low rates and tight inventory and all that stuff, thought it was a good idea to put their home on the market. And so there, things are moving in the right direction. On the left-hand side, one of the things that's interesting is actually even throughout the crisis, people were more bullish on buying homes, even in the middle of a global pandemic, than they were back in 2019 when we had almost 5% mortgage interest rates. I think it just goes to show how unique this crisis is, that I think one of the upshots of this, and why housing is leading the way out of this downturn, is that it has really reinforced the value proposition of the home, right? I don't know if you just heard, but my kid just walked, behind me. He was using the computer and then just walked out and shut the door. I'm gonna have to go yell at him now. No, I'm kidding. But, we all kind of are grappling with a lot of these challenges of this new kind of reality. And one of the most important things to us in our life isn't going to be our BMW or our new this or that. I think, people are taking a long, hard look at their homes, and you see that, again, people on the left-hand side here, it's even backed up by the data, think it's a better time to buy a home now than they did, over the course of the last year, even in the midst, again, of a big global recession. And of course, always when people ask you if it's a good time to buy, you want to like channel that inner Ira Levine, right? Who used to walk around with his sport coat, like smoking cigarettes inside at his dinner parties in the 80s when all of his buddies had like a 16% mortgage and he had a 12% and had these, he was always bragging about that. And today we found out that the weekly, rate dropped below 3% for the first time in recorded history. Presumably, at some point, inflation is going to normalize back to about 2%, right? And so in real terms, this is almost free money, right? The amount of money that you save on a monthly mortgage payment just in carrying costs as a result of low rates, even compared to where they were 6 months ago, is substantial. And certainly compared to where they were over the course of the last couple of years, this translates over the life of a 30-year loan into real honest to goodness money that you might actually be able to do something with. So if you've got a job and you're still earning that income and you can find a home that you can afford and actually want, this would suggest that it's a phenomenal time to buy a home right now. Here's just the dollars and cents of it. So this is just the principal and interest payments. But what we've done is we've taken the median price home in California and we just worked out what's the monthly payment on that home, at current rates, just the principal and interest. Unfortunately, low interest rates don't save us anything on our property taxes, unfortunately. But you can see that it's real savings, right? If you go back to 2018, the median price home at current rates was costing you $2,460 just for principal and interest. Today, the median priced home, which by the way, we just set a new all-time high price level. So this is the highest the median price has ever been. And yet on that more expensive home, the payment today at these low rates is just $2,100 or $2,160. So it's exactly $300 a month cheaper. That's a free car, right? You can now get a house and a car for the price that you used to just be able to get a house for back in 2018. And that's a more expensive house, by the way. And so I think that, again, we always get asked this question in the field, right? And people say, when I'm out there as this kind of data nerd, people, that's the number one thing. Is it a good time to buy? Should I be selling my home? Is it a good time to sell? Well, when people, it always comes down to individual circumstance, right? I always have to say, well, it depends. Are you employed? Do you feel good about your job? Are you making enough money? Can you find a house that you can actually afford? But assuming you can check all those boxes, the fundamentals say that this is a great time to buy a home, particularly in light of the fact that prices have not moved at all. And this is just a much different kind of a crisis. We'll talk about prices in a second, but I also hear people are saying, yeah, I have a buddy who says he's going to wait until prices come down by like 75 grand, right? Well, you might be really cutting off your nose to spite your face and missing the boat on a historic opportunity. And again, channel that inner Ira Levine and his 12.5% mortgage rate, right? He would kill for I almost wish he was around just so he could take out another mortgage, right? Because he would probably just be loving that. He'd be taking out every mortgage you could ever find because it's just, again, a historic opportunity. And indeed, we see that consumers are responding to this, right? So these are the mortgage applications numbers. And you can see that but for the kind of weeks bookending the holiday weekend of 4th of July, mortgage applications have been on a tear, right? Those are the weekly changes here on the left-hand side, but on the right hand, it's the year-to-year comparison. So where we are versus where we were in 2019, even though we saw the pace slow over the course of the last couple of weeks, we're still up from 2019 levels of mortgage applications. And these are just new purchases, by the way. I already stripped away the refi. So this is just purchase demand. We're up 15.6% last week from where we were at the same time in 2019. Again, in the midst of a pandemic with 11.1% unemployment, and we're running 15.5% ahead on the mortgage applications front. So again, lots and lots of evidence out there that the economy is healing and that's translating actually into our own neck of the woods in the housing market in terms of buyer demand. Same exact numbers when you look at showings. So this is from showingtime.com, where a lot of MLSs allow you to schedule those private showings through. Nationwide numbers, obviously, but what you can see is that we're ahead of where we were at the start of the crisis, right? So the orange line is higher today than it was before. And you also see that we're higher than we were last year, right? That the orange line is higher than the green line, right? So we're running ahead of pre-crisis levels, and we're also running ahead of the game from where we were back in 2019. The buyer demand in particular has really come roaring back. And again, I think that's a testament not just to the low rates, right, but also to just what this crisis has done to the value proposition of home ownership itself. And I think that all shows. And of course, the good news is that that's showing up in the market data. So we just released the June press release this morning, and the market came roaring back, a 42.4% increase in the number of closed sales in June compared to May. That's the single largest increase in home sales we've ever recorded since we started recording this stuff back in January 1979. So better, best performance in 40 years, coming on the heels of, frankly, the worst performance in 40 years. But we did claw back a huge proportion of the declines. We're still running 12.8% below where we were at this time in 2019, but we're no longer running 41% below where we were in 2019. So again, we've clawed much of the decline back just over the course of last month. We're back to a pace of 339,000 home sales, almost 340,000 home sales after 2 months in a row of being below 300,000. Just to put that in perspective, prior to the crisis, we were basically running about 395,000. So, huge impacts and huge progress. Take that back again, just to where we were in May, just to remind ourselves, right? We were 41.5% below where we were, and prices had gone down by about 3.7% on median. Fast forward just 1 month ahead to June, and again, we're now only running about 12% below where we were in 2019. And in fact, prices went up, and we set a new all-time high record level for price, with a median price of $626,170 in California, as the unsold inventory index declined back below 3 months of supply. So again, when sellers are reluctant, right, we already took care of the buyer kind of reluctance piece. When sellers are reluctant to sell, I mean, all-time high prices, homes that are selling on median in less than 20 days, with just 2.7 months of supply on the market in an environment with 2.9% interest rates. I wouldn't argue that this is the absolute best time in a global pandemic to sell a home, but hard to see any net, adverse impacts that sellers are really facing either, right? And so I think that is, we're going to have to kind of stick the numbers in front of people's face, because, the basic intuition is, yeah, we're in a recession, I should probably pump the brakes. Pending sales also surged, right? So we had the single largest increase in pending sales back in May. So we kind of, spoiler alert, knew that this increase was coming in June, but we saw that the pending numbers continued to move upward by about 22.5%. So we do expect that the decline will soften further in July. And in fact, we might even post a year-to-year gain in home sales in July. Things have actually come back that much. And of course, I don't think we're going to get the full 21% increase. So in June, pendings were 21% above where they were in June of 2019. Excuse me. That being said, we have seen the COVID stuff start to ramp back up, and job losses did creep back up over the last couple of weeks. So some of those might fall out of escrow. We don't know for sure, but hard to see us not posting at least some gain, even if it's not the full 21% next month, right? So things, again, still moving in that positive direction when you think about it from a forward-looking perspective, and we think that should continue through July. So these are the weekly numbers, right, that are a little bit more timely. I haven't updated last week's numbers yet, but you can see right up through 4th of July, the closed sales had finally, matched up with what we had seen happening in pending, again, since about mid-April. Less people getting cold feet. So this is part of our weekly survey of members. We asked, have you had a buyer withdraw an offer and back out, right, on something they had otherwise been ready to pull the trigger on? Those numbers have been falling pretty consistently for the last 5-6 weeks. Just 10% of members we talked to over the weekend of the 10th to the 13th had a buyer that actually withdrew an offer. Similarly, on the pulling your home down off the MLS on the sell side, right, that we've fallen from about 25% back in late May to just 17% of realtors that we talked to over the weekend had a seller that actually removed their property from the MLS last week. Very similar story here. If you look at the rebound in, the South Valley, I didn't bring all the stuff for Sacramento and Stanislaus and all that because I figured you guys wouldn't care about that. But you see a very similar story all across the South Valley, almost identical growth rates. Tulare was up 29% on a month-to-month basis in June. That's slightly less than what you see in some of the other parts of the valley, but interestingly, we didn't fall as much during March and April. And so when you look at us on a year-to-year basis, we're one of the few areas in the valley that's actually ahead of where we were in closed sales compared to last year, right? So we've actually clawed back virtually all of the decline that we experienced back in March and April here locally. And even, as close by as like Kings and Merced and stuff, you're still seeing, 6 to 20% below 2019 levels. So things have definitely moved in the right direction, even locally, I would argue, even potentially more strongly in our local market. Again, people aren't chained to those desks, and I can attest to this in their jobs in Koreatown, downtown LA anymore. And so the idea of living somewhere where there's actually quality of life, I think, is going to be a huge feather in our cap. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see us outperforming the rest of the state a little bit now. A, I can afford it there. B, higher quality of life. C, I don't have to go to those terrible desk jobs in downtown LA anymore. And I think that's one of the reasons, frankly, why we haven't seen a lot of impacts to prices as well, right? You see that the people who lost their jobs have been very concentrated in sectors that I would argue, for better or worse, I would argue for worse, aren't necessarily the population of folks who are out there buying homes in California in this kind of unaffordable environment. The folks who lost their jobs are largely in restaurants, hotels, service sector type jobs. And unfortunately, we're so unaffordable here in the state that it hasn't really wiped out the buyer demand side of the equation. And what you see is very negligible, I would argue, minuscule impacts to prices. In fact, if you look at median list prices on a per square foot basis here in California, I don't know why it says Southern California. These are California, but they're higher than they were before the crisis. And the same thing even on closed sale prices, right? We've gone from about $360 a foot for a closed sale down to about $358. So if you can see major price impacts there, for those buyers who think that prices are going to come down and that being in a recession means I'm going to save $100,000, I think they're in for a rude awakening. The rates are very low. The buyer demand, I showed you, we're running ahead on mortgage applications, showings, you name it. Things are stronger than they were even last year, and we don't see any impacts to prices. When you ask about the percentage of listings that have been reduced, there's a smaller percentage of active listings on the MLS that were reduced last week than there were before COVID-19. Same thing on closed sales, right? If you go back to the week of March 14th for closed sales, 56% of the closings were below that original MLS list price. The week of 4th of July was 54%, right? And so again, you just do not see any evidence that you're going to have the kind of price hits that we saw back in 2008. I do think there's a lot of psychological scar tissue left over from 2008 when we had that housing-led downturn. We had all those zero down loans, all the option arms, right? You remember the ninja loans, the no income, no job or asset loans, the zero documentation loans, all of that stuff. People this time had skin in the game. They had 720, FICO scores. I would argue that we didn't let enough people into the housing market this whole housing cycle. And so we don't have this kind of house of cards mortgage environment that it just takes some kind of an economic shock to set the whole snowball kind of rolling and to get the whole ball of wax unraveling. This was an unprecedented shock, absolutely. We haven't seen anything like it from an economic standpoint, but this time it was a shock that was happening to what was otherwise a relatively healthy economy, not this kind of ticking time bomb economy that we had back in 2007, 2008. So that's the good news, right? We're seeing all kinds of improvements in the broad macro economy, and that they are translating into improvements in the housing market. The bad news is, and again, we still have, a lot of healing left to do. We've added back, 7.5 million of the jobs that we lost, but that means we still have about 13.5 million jobs to go, right? So things are moving in the right direction. But again, long road to hoe on this until we get back towards a full recovery, and continuing, there's a lot of households out there still facing difficulty. Yes, we don't have 25 million people on the government dole anymore, but we still have about 17.5 million people on the government dole. And so, again, things are moving in the right direction. And I don't think this necessarily has direct implications for us in the housing market. I think the vast majority of these wouldn't have otherwise been shopping for homes, at least not here in California. But this has ripple effects for the broader economy, right? If those folks aren't making paychecks, they're not out there supporting restaurants, and the restaurant owners can't buy homes or buy a vacation property or what have you. There's all the kind of what the econ nerds like me like to call the multiplier effects that will still ripple through to housing, even if this isn't like a direct impact to the actual people who might have been hitting you up to go for a showing on a property. And in fact, here in California, we've actually seen the unemployment claims numbers going in the wrong direction, not by a lot. We're not seeing a really steep run up in new unemployment claims, but you'd like to see these numbers going in the right direction as we saw in the rest of the US. And in fact, they are inching up ever so slightly, and we're at our highest level in about 10 weeks now for new unemployment insurance claims. That's still about 300,000 folks who applied for unemployment for the first time last week. Those are new job losses, right? And the other thing I would say is that our inventory issues are, the inventory chickens, I guess, are going to come home to roost sooner than later. And we already see the progress that we've made in pending sales over the last 2 months start to peter out, right? The last couple months, weeks, we had like flat growth in pending. And then last week we had pendings actually start to go down. So the buyers want to buy, but again, if the inventory isn't out there, then we can't turn those into pendings, and those pendings don't ever become closed sales and commissions and all of that and home ownership and all that good stuff that we really ultimately care about. And unfortunately the news is getting worse, not better. We had the biggest decline in many years for active listings in June. They were down by 43% compared to where they were in June of 2019. And so again, hard to get closed transaction. If it's not for sale, then it doesn't get sold, obviously. And unfortunately, it's even a little bit more grim in the Central Valley. You go back to June of 2019, we had almost 10,500 homes on the various MLSs across the valley. Take a snapshot of June of this year, there was 5,500 homes out there for sale, right? And so in some ways, it's a miracle that we were even able to post those 30 and 40% declines in June, right, locally, because wow, we really are exhausting those available inventory that we have out there. And indeed, when you look at the new listings numbers, they're also moving in the wrong direction. Tremendous progress. People started putting their homes back on the market, but you still have a lot of sellers who don't think it's smart to sell in a recession, who think they're going to take a huge haircut, or they're going to be sitting on a property for ages, or they're going to have to make, significant concessions and discounts. And again, I think that, get out there, you might, tweak the ear of all your network out there and go, man, there's nothing out there. Are you sure you don't want to sell? Because look, there's nothing for sale. Look how much they're selling for. Look how quick they're selling. Because man, we desperately need the inventory. And actually, I think it's advantageous to be one of the only homes on the market in a particular area, in a particular price segment, with all this buyer demand out there. And again, the other thing I worry about is with all this uptick in cases, will we continue to see that buyer demand hold up? And again, I can't answer that, but I will just show you this chart that shows that when cases spiked back in April, it had a pretty severe impact on the number of people who wanted to go out and look at properties, right? We haven't seen that yet. At the tail end of this chart, you can see the orange line is still riding pretty high, right? But you can also see the cases have started to ramp up. And so, what the forecast is, I just don't know, but I think that it's possible that eventually, if we let this get out of control again, that it could eat into that buyer demand. But so far, demand is just very, very strong. We did see, more slowing last week from realtors. So that is one of the reasons why I just want to throw this cautionary, piece out there. We did see more realtors doing listing appointments last week, but if you ask how many actually listed a property, that number actually went down after, several weeks of getting a little bit better. So I do think that we're starting to see some of these nascent impacts with the order shutting things back down again, and people starting to freak out a little bit again, that we could see the demand side suffer a little bit. We saw fewer realtors enter escrow last week, right? Just 30% compared to 32. Still better than where it was in early May, but I just want you to be aware that we are starting to see some nascent signs that the recent increase in uncertainty is how I would characterize it, right? Is just that, I don't think we need to abandon our optimism, but I do think that the uncertainty has grown over the course of the last 2 weeks. And I think that realtors are that's what we're seeing the realtors report here in the statistics. 6% over the last couple of weeks have actually had a transaction fall out, and that's up a little bit from where it was last month. Still not a lot, only 6% of transactions, right? But again, if we had our druthers, we'd like to see it moving in the opposite direction with fewer falling out. And of course, fewer realtors ultimately had a transaction close last week. Again, still progress from early May, but the last week we did see fairly consistent signs that realtors had a little bit of a tougher time recently. And so when we think about it from the standpoint of Tulare County specifically, you can see a very similar story, right? I brought this local data, but in some ways I didn't even have to, because you can see that closed sales have started to make some pretty significant upward progress over the course of the last month or so, and these are daily closed sales numbers. You could see also, though, that we're going to face some of those same challenges in terms of pending, and the number of new listings isn't going up at a rapid pace. This is our prime time, right? During May, June, and July, we should have seen those new listings going through the roof. And you can see, indeed, on the right-hand side, when you look at total actives out there, when we've chewed through all those new sales and had such a nice rebound, what it's really done to the top right corner of those active listings are just essentially non-existent now. And that's probably why we're seeing prices go up so much, right? You go back to the beginning of the crisis, it was $160 a foot for that median priced home. Now it's up to about $166 a foot. And so again, for those folks who don't want to sell because they think they're taking a huge haircut, show them this chart, right? To the buyers who think they're going to save 150 grand on that property, also show them this chart, right? Because I think there's a big gap out there in expectations on both sides of the equation. You do see slightly more sales that are actually being discounted here on the left-hand side. About 56% or so were discounted last week, but actually, the discount isn't very sizable. In fact, we're basically in that same 4% range or so that the typical closed sale that does have a discount is closing below original asking price. And that's exactly where it was at the beginning of March before COVID. So, all of the same phenomenon that I described for you statewide is playing out in our own backyard. I would just argue that our recovery has been a little bit more robust on the closed sale side, but also that our inventory issues are going to also hamper the rebound moving forward, because again, we've got lots and lots of demand, but in particular locally, the supply is going to become an increasing challenge when we don't have 600 homes on the MLS, but only 200 or 300. That's a challenge to get those closed sales, right? And so if you look at the outlook, we saw big declines for Q2, but the forecasts for the recovery are all over the map, right? Q3, you see like people like Bank of America think the economy's still going to be falling. And places like Wells Fargo think we're going to have a 23, 24% rebound. And so again, the amount of uncertainty over the last 2 weeks has increased, unfortunately, not decreased. This had been our kind of baseline scenario for sales forecast, that we had that 40% decline in May, and that we would continue to claw that back over the course of the next 7 months through the end of the year, but still end about 10% below where we were in 2019. We did say that if we had to re-shelter in place and COVID reared its ugly head and all of that stuff, that we might have to downward revise. And I think that the probability of a downside scenario has increased over the course of the last couple months. We haven't changed this baseline yet, but we're taking a pretty hard look at the numbers coming in right now. home prices, we expected that we would only have these low single-digit price impacts, but one of the things that we weren't counting on was just how low rates were going to fall. The house was going to become so important to the extent that we were going to see such a resurgence of buyer demand, even above not just pre-crisis levels, but like above where we were over the course of the last 2 years. And I think that we might even see price growth or less price impacts even than what I was forecasting here, which was already only calling for low single-digit price impacts. So if I had to put a bow on it all for you, and I know you guys are probably going to pull the shepherd's hook out on me any minute, but just quick, I would summarize by saying, yes, things have gotten a lot better, right? We see closed sales that are finally matching the pendings that we saw a month ago. And we've been above pre-crisis levels for the last 3 weeks in terms of the number of homes that were actually closing. And that's largely due to improvement in the macroeconomy, be it unemployment, consumer spending, these super low interest rates, affordability, all of that good stuff was moving together and showing market signs of improvement. No, I don't think you want to go out and grab your champagne and pour yourself a beautiful mimosa because I do think that we're seeing the nascent signs that the rebound is starting to lose some steam, largely because the boys are back in town, shall we say, when it comes to a lack of inventory on the market. And unfortunately, there's also the looming cloud of what COVID is going to do. So just to keep it really real, I would say that we're on the mend, right? But that we've got a lot of healing left to do. There's still the multiplier effects and even some new job losses, I think, that will continue to bubble through the economy. I think that the baseline that we had is potentially looking more like a best case scenario as the uncertainty starts to rise. But again, I can't report on that until we get more information. And so I think that the bottom line is that we can still be cautiously optimistic with the emphasis on cautiously still moving forward. And so again, I would just say thank you to Maggie and Janet for having me back. And if I didn't beat you into submission already, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, if there are any.
Thank you, Jordan. Great update. Do we have any questions?
I have one question. Do you see short sales foreclosures coming back due to the environment we are in now?
That's a really good question. If you would have asked me that about a week and a half ago, I would have probably been able to just get away with saying, no, not really. I hadn't been really concerned about defaults and foreclosures. I think the government learned a very critical lesson last time around in the kind of arena of pay now or pay later, that by not helping out people to stay in their homes, they didn't avoid any pain really in the end, that it just resulted in an even bigger crisis. And so I was optimistic that not just the forbearance, but the workout plan that came along with the forbearance, that they were going to let you work out, that you weren't going to have kind of a 6-month balloon payment on day one of the 7th month. That would have been just, delaying the inevitable, and we would have seen a huge wave. But they had agreed to, in the best case, they'd let you work it out over a 5-month or a 5-year period. And we did some math on that. And basically what it meant was like a 10% increase to your monthly mortgage payment. So if you skipped 6 months of mortgage payments and you paid it off over a 5-year period, it basically meant that your new monthly mortgage payment was about 10% higher. So if you had a $2,000 payment, you'd have a $2,200 a month payment for 5 years. That I thought was probably doable and people could stay in their homes. That being said, with this new closure order, and if we have to re-shelter in place for 3 or 4 more months again, I think that the prospects for the recovery look a lot different. I think businesses could weather a 2 to 3 month pause with some government assistance and extended unemployment benefits and, pandemic unemployment and small business loans and all the other stuff that they threw at it. Using that as a bridge to get over 2 to 3 months time is one thing. But having to bridge across 7, 8, 9, 10, God forbid 12 months, I think is just a much different story. I don't think that there's an amount of government spending that we could throw at it that's going to gonna ensure that everybody survives that long. And so I think that will be, that's a growing risk as the uncertainty rises that I hadn't necessarily been worried about before.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I get that reaction a lot. It's okay.
Jordan, once again, thank you so much for everything and for this information.
Thank you so much for having me back. Oh, and also I'll send these to Christina as well. So if you guys want these slides or to show them to your buyers or sellers or whatever, I'll send these as soon as we get off the line, and you guys can, hopefully they're helpful.
Okay, I'll look for that.
Perfect. We're going to go ahead and do our drawing size. So we're still going to do the meal, and then we're going to do 2 Starbucks cards.
Okay.
So, Christina, you want to do the wheel?
Yeah, let me turn it so you can see it. Okay, everybody's name is on there. Clicking. Oh, I'm so done. I am so done. Laura, again? Can you see it, Maggie?
Oh, that's awesome. Thanks.
Something is wrong with this.
I know.
I think it's not broke. I think it's good.
I think it's broken.
Okay, look, I'm clicking remove. Okay, here we go. That was dinner, right?
Woo!
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Dina, I just passed you. Galaxy S2, S20. Who is that? Are they still
Galaxy?
On? Is Galaxy still on?
Yes, they're still on.
Galaxy?
I'm trying to unmute them, but it's not allowing
me
to.
I see him, but I don't know his name.
Oh, it's
Lorenzo.
Lorenzo.
Oh, okay. What's your last name, Lorenzo?
Vasquez. Vasquez.
Well, you won a gift card to Starbucks.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. So those will come into your email. Laura will get with you about picking up your gift card.
All righty. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, Barbara. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, Laura. I'll get with you, okay?
Okay.
Hey, Zane. What was I going to tell you?
What, Janet?
I said, good job, Maggie.
Thank you.
I feel a little bit more less depressed today than I did before he gave us that presentation.
You feel a little bit less depressed? What?
I feel a little bit more uplifted. How's that?
Okay, he did a good job.
There you go. I feel the same way.
Good job.
Actually, he did.
It is.
He covered a lot of information in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and if you can actually email those slides, that would be awesome.
Okay, he just sent them to me. I just seen the email come in.
Perfect.
Do you want me to send to our committee and then we can branch it out? Do you want me to have Wendy put it on Facebook? Like, what do you want to do?
I think you should just send them to all of the members.
Like everybody, just one big blast?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
just information, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, ladies.
Do you want it on?
that we're not going to have attendance.
I know.
Yeah, we
I'm
ended
scared.
up with about 29 people, which was, I was getting scared too at first.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
I was scared that we were going to, remember that one time we had like, what, 7 or 8? Yeah.
I was.
It is what it is.
Yeah, we're providing it, so.
At least everything he
Yeah.
said, we're feeling it. So we kind of already know, but it's nice to have all that confirmed.
Just the graphs and the charts in front of us to see the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cynthia and her creepy dog.
I
What?
know, sorry.
Oh my God! I just realized there was a dog behind you.
It's Lady B.
Does Lady B listen as well as Janet's dog?
I don't know if she doesn't bark though.
Lady barks on the box screen.
One of my customers.
Oh, let me start recording.
The what?